Hello, welcome back to Art Tutorials with OAmmieJ, and so this is a part 2 of the fandom drawing for Miki from Chrono made by Square in 1999. So right now, as you can see, I'm just putting down my base colors. Now this helps to kind of give you an overall feel of what everything will be when you start going in to kind of render her out. Like, it helps to have the base colors to not be confused about what was red, what was blue. You just know because you already have the base color in. Now you just have to find the shades or the highlight colors. It saves a lot of time, but if you work faster by just going into it and just start rendering, then go ahead. To each his own. Everybody has a different style. I'm just showing you my process. Now, as you can see, you saw those little color dots that kind of showed up a little bit on the side. That is my palette. It's always good to have one of those. It helps you kind of keep in mind what you're going for, what colors you're going to be using. It keeps you from going a little bit color crazy and just using everything under the rainbow. Because that, if you were to say, if I was to do this tutorial and I'm using every color under the rainbow without at least giving you some kind of borderline guides or like a palette to follow, you would just, I may do a shade and you know what I used, what color I used. And if you're actually working in a professional setting, that can get a bit, confusing and probably problematic for the team, because you probably be sharing palettes and brushes, things like that. So it's good to get into the habit of just working with a palette now, kind of having in mind what colors you're going to be using and kind of stick to that guideline. Is economical too, especially if you want to work in printing and things like that. It helps to just already have like a few colors that you'd be using for your shirt designs and things like that. And so note, you can do the base colors all on one layer. However, if you want, there's also another trick. If you want to be able to use your magic wand and kind of pick specific areas and spots based on color, I would recommend you do each set of colors on a different layer. Like, all reds would be on one layer, all purples will be on one layer, all golds will be on one layer. It just kind of helps so the computer doesn't get confused when you're trying to pick things. And also, now you see on the left, I have a reference image from just something I found on the internet, on Pinterest. And this is actually what inspired the pose. Now note, there's a difference in the pose. Like, her hand on her hip is adjusted to be slightly different. And her hand that you see resting on her chest is actually resting on her chin. Now, you have to note when I say look for reference images, that doesn't mean copy what you see, because that starts to infringe on the integrity of your art. But definitely make use of reference images. Like, I like that color, the kind of bleak background the model is in. So I took the colors with the color selector tool, and I took the colors and I'm using that now to create a background for Miki. Now note, it will not be the same background you saw behind that model, because once again, you're supposed to use your reference images for inspiration and not exactly copyright. And I will admit, backgrounds for me are still a tricky thing. So I'm kind of just getting the feel of the land right now. I'm working in darks at the edges because I want her to be the main focal point. So the lighter blues and the more hazy blues will be at the center where she is, kind of creating a halo effect, kind of giving a false sense of depth. And the darker areas will be around the corners, kind of creeping into her, kind of thing. And right now, while all the colors are kind of solid on her, it won't really give that three-dimensional effect quite yet. But as I start to render, it really helps out. So right now, just play with it. Play with your canvas. You never know what you may come up with. Towards like sometimes inspiration doesn't even strike for the background until you're like almost halfway through. Most times people go with what they're strong with. If you're stronger with the figure, you focus on the figure first and then you do the background second. Some people are stronger with background, so backgrounds first, figure second. Once again, to each his own. Is what works for you, is what gets you to where you need to be. Now, all I'm doing is adding a kind of a darker peach to kind of make her face more three-dimensional, adding shades and shadows to show where the nose kind of bridges out, where the lips kind of plumb out, so you cast a shadow underneath her lower lip and even above her lip, because it kind of is supposed to, if you're following the laws of nature, it's supposed to puff out a bit. And note that there's a gray in her iris. When I get more focused on the eyes, I'll explain that later. But for now, just notice how I'm kind of fixing the shadows so that it kind of makes it seem like there's a light casting over her, kind of from casting from the left towards the right, kind of thing. It's not necessarily a harsh light. I want it to be soft. Most times, what I usually say is you should just block in your shades first, and then you can kind of smoothen and soften the edges later. Just make sure at least you know where your shades are. So I'm giving more definition to her skin by working in some shades towards the right side of her body. I usually place my shades anywhere that I'm trying to indicate has mass or is voluptuous or has like is more three-dimensional and kind of pops out a bit. I'm shading her fingers because they're behind her face, trying to indicate some shadowing and distance. Trying to pop out the corner of that hand, letting the pinky be more dominant than the rest. Now I'm just working some shades into her face, trying to enunciate her cheekbones and prop up some highlights and some key points like the tip of the nose, side of her forehead, you know, the typical parts. And all I'm doing to blend these colors in is really, I'm just using the dense brush tool. I'll lay out the bulk of the color onto the figure, and then I'll go back in with maybe the transparent brush or the smoothing brush and just kind of smooth it back in with the color that was below it. That's why sometimes it's good to toggle between your two main colors. Like you can have your new color as your prominent color, and then the back color should be the darker color, and as you're brushing and painting, you just kind of use your mouse and toggle between the two and kind of blend them more evenly that way. Now you see me try to put a highlight on her forehead as previously mentioned. Now if you feel a highlight is not working, do not try to force it. That may just not be where it's meant to be, or it just doesn't look right. Art is all about aesthetics, is how things look. So even if it is supposed to be there in a real situation, if it doesn't look right on the picture, there's no use, there's no reason for it to be there. Now for lips, I start off with a more neutral kind of plum color, and then you can add the more vibrant, lighter, saturated colors later as kind of a gloss and a highlight to the lips. But most of the time your base color should be something darker that kind of encompasses the lips. So it kind of gives it like a kind of, makes it feel like the gloss is on top of the lips and it's not just, her lips are just bright neon pink. That just doesn't look natural. You can always put a splash of white there to kind of show the sheen of the lip gloss. It's all really preferential. If you just like a dark regular color, that's okay too. Now for eyes, I start off with a darker color kind of surrounding the pupil, and then I line that with a trimming of a light, very light, like I'm talking neon blue, vibrant electric blue, being lining the pupil, and that makes it pop. That makes it, the contrast is so amazing, it kind of lights it up. And as you can see, I'm kind of going with gradients for the gray in her eye. Like I'm gradually working my way up to a white. I'm not just going straight out white right away. I'm working up to it so I can give it that kind of tear-eyed effect, you know? It actually looks like her cornea is like kind of liquid, like she's about to cry, or like they kind of look reflective. And that sometimes is a very good. A lot of game artists use that kind of technique. And as you can see, I'm trying to unify her with the background as well, so I'm using that same murky maroon, kind of teal maroon on her face to work in the shades as well. Like, don't be afraid to experiment. See if you can do this. If shades can be any color, it doesn't have to be a natural skin color. It doesn't have to be like a brown or a very, very dark plum. You can use blues, you can use purples. It just depends on how you blend them in with the skin color. And that will show whether they're realistic enough or not. And you'll come to note is the same for jewelry too. Like, I know for most part, when you're trying to show shading on gold jewelry, most people either use an orange or a burgundy red, and which is fine. But once again, I'm trying to unify her items with the background, so I'm using that maroon teal blue again to do the shading on the earrings. And notice it's not making it look any worse or anything. It's just actually, it's making it look like, you know, you've seen gaudy gypsy kind of jewelry before, and it actually sometimes the rust on it or the fade on it when it's like actual metal with gold painted over it is a little bit bluish in color. But God, you gotta admit though, this is one of the best games Square ever came up with. Like, it just bugs me, it just bugs my mind that they would not be willing to make a part 2. I'm like, I mean, no one hates Final Fantasy. I mean, that was a pretty good show, but I feel like it's kind of run its course. It's like beating a dead horse now. Like, no matter what stories they come up with the Final Fantasy series, I just feel like it's just, is another Bleach or another Naruto. It's kind of run its course kind of thing. And people are either waiting for some of the old classics to come back again, or they're waiting for something entirely different new, a totally different new franchise. And believe it or not, I feel they're going the same way with Kingdom Hearts. So I really, really think that they could really strike gold by bringing this back. And yes, this is a sales pitch to Square Enix if they ever somehow surf the web and catch this. Please make a part 2. There are a lot of people waiting for it, people willing to buy it. Just, I mean, it was still pixelated and it had such a wide fan base. The fact that they're able to get such a fan base with a pixelated game, it's a pretty big deal. Imagine that game with today's graphics. It would be so badass. But anyway, on to the art. Sorry, that was me geeking out, fanning out. Forgive me. Now you're gonna see I'm gonna add that blue again. There you see. I'm trying to add it to the darker spots of the shades, like the very, very dark sides. I'm just working in the shades to her necklace. Now you see I'm trying to get the shine on her tube top. I'm trying to put a lighter color over the material to show where the highlights hit. And as you can see, the yellow isn't working quite as well as I thought it would. But in cases like these, it's okay for you see I have my red as my second base color. That's for when I mess up. All I have to do is go with the solid brush, just go over everything I've done with the solid red, and it just turns it all back to the base color. And I can just start over again. Eventually, after just mix and matching colors for a while, you Oh, and if a brush isn't doing what you want it to do, no worries. You can actually start to toggle with the configuration and figure out what you need. If a brush isn't doing what you want, there's nothing wrong with making a brush of your own right then and there. How I got that sheer pink to go over her skirt is just by using a transparency brush, like the ones with very low opacity, so they're like an overlay. And now for the fun part, the hair. Now, please note, Miki's hair is kind of orange in tint, so that's why I'm using orange. If you're actually trying to make a blonde person, like a realistic blonde, you'd likely be using browns for your shading instead of orange. But since this is an animation character and her hair is tinged orange, that's what I'm using for my shades for her hair. Please note, I'm putting the shades kind of working with the lines I already have for the strands. And this is a very kind of cartoonish way of thinking about it. But it's more, when it comes to animation, it's more about when you've decided on a specific location to start putting highlights, you can kind of tell where those are. Because you see, I leave certain spots alone. I don't even bother putting any tinge of orange to it at all. Those spots are where my highlights are going to be. And generally, by rule of thumb, you can kind of see it goes in a way where you can kind of draw a line right across where the highlights are going. So if you see the highlights on the left at a certain position, you're likely going to see the highlights also on the right at that same kind of wavelength level. Thank you very much. This has been Drawing with OAmmieJ, and I hope to see you again. Please subscribe to my channel if you like this, so you can keep in tune for anything in the future to come around. And if you'd like to see certain characters get drawn, you can also kind of send a request, and let's see if it actually gets onto the next tutorial. Thank you very much. Goodbye.